The term foreign agent, what does that mean?
It's danger.
The enemy of the government,
Anyone who opposes the official narrative.
the enemy of the authorities.
Everybody whom they consider under foreign influence.
Anyone who dares stand up to Putin.
Foreign agency is target. Criminal cases is target.
You can go to prison like this.
All my emails are being read, all my phone conversations are being recorded.
We feel permanent danger.
You cannot feel safe anywhere.
They would be saying, you should start working for us or your son will be in danger.
The regime is using punitive psychiatry, torture, extreme violence, including sexual violence.
They beat, they use plastic bags to suffocate.
The regime sees people who oppose its narrative as traitors and foreign agents.
Putin fear any competition from all.
I am so furious that this bunch of thieves and murderers is trying to carry out a genocide of the Ukrainian people.
I don't want to pretend that it is not my country. It is mine. It's not his.
It is a badge of honor. There is nothing more rewarding, than to feel that you are seen as a traitor.
There are two reasons for me why I am still a journalist. First, I just want to protect my audience. I want to protect them from the fake news, from the aggression of the government, of Vladimir Putin's regime. I just want to support them. The second reason, I cannot change anything about this war by my hands. I cannot stop these missiles. I cannot stop Putin. I cannot kill him. But I need to do something. So I do the only thing I really know how to do.
Всем привет, доброе утро, здравствуйте. Вы смотрите Breakfast Show, ведущий номер...
My name is Tatiana Felgenhauer. I'm an anchor and journalist and ex-radio anchor, and now just a YouTuber.
Трагическими, опасными для жизни событиями.
I wanted to be a journalist all my life. My stepfather, he said, if you really want to be a journalist, you can come to Echo Moscow. So I came there and I stayed there. And I spent really all my life there on the radio. And I became an anchor of the breakfast show, the best and the most popular show. Here is our morning show. It's March 2017. It's about how people were detained and how cruel were policemen forces, and it's so typical for Russia. So 2017, 2014, 2010, 2022, it doesn't matter, it's always the same. It's interesting that I suddenly found this video about the protests, because it's a common thing to blame Russians. They are not protest, they don't protest, but they did a lot. But if you have so many different special forces to beat people, to torture people, to judge people, to take them to prison, it's not so easy to protest.
Уже в виде карты. Большое спасибо всем и до завтра.
Пока.
До свидания.
It was Tuesday because we had a program, and just in the middle of this show, the radio shut it down. And a lot of people, they just, sent a video, like they try to do anything with the radio, but on our frequency, it was like shh. But on the YouTube channel, the program continued. He said, like, I have a breaking news that the board of Gazprom Media decided to close the radio station of Moscow. I was trying to stay in Moscow as long as I could, but after some people was arrested for so-called fake news, and I think all of the media was blocked, I realized that I couldn't work anymore. It's impossible. We were shut down in the beginning of March, and I left Moscow in the end of May.
My mom was the first person who asked me when you will leave the country. I bought tickets on the second day of the war, and I leave my country in the beginning of March. According to the perspective of our authorities, all people who doing journalism and who doing their work, in the right way, they could be punished for it. You could fine for your job. You could be in prison for your job if you live in Russia, of course. I think that the most dangerous situation has our editor-in-chief, because he is a head of organization which produce fakes according to the perspective of our authorities. To be honest, I don't think that he will able to return after 10 years.
Okay, I'm Sergei Smirnov. I'm editor-in-chief of Mediazona. Mediazona is independent media, Russian media in exile. My friend Petr Vizilov from Pussy Riot invited me to create new Russian independent media. Idea of Petr was media about prison system of Russia, about criminal cases against opposition, and about courts and about human rights. We think about our media will be little special media, maybe like Marshall Project for America, but it's very interesting thing because Russia not have politics, really, because election in Russia is not politics. This is joke. This is not really election. Many people don't understand about this, but real politics in Russia is courts, criminal cases against Navalny and against many another opposition leaders, and political pressure, really. And political pressure, this is all politics in Russia, this really. And we wrote about this problem, and because many people started read our media and we have support, Putin don't like any critics and critics from independent media too. And Putin know about influence of independent media for Russian society. Opposition media has millions and 10 millions, 20 millions viewers every month. This is big part of Russian society, and because Putin wants to liquidate us. Now we live in exile because we have problem with the Russian authorities, and Russian authorities call our media foreign agent, and me personal foreign agent.
Independent news sites like Mediazona have always been a thorn in the side of Putin's propaganda machine. But since the war in Ukraine began, the Kremlin has further tightened its stranglehold on Russia's opposition, forcing many of them to leave the country. As well as outright bans on websites like Mediazona, the BBC and CNN, punitive laws mean that journalists and opposition members run the very real risk of facing lengthy jail sentences if they publish what the Kremlin deems to be fake news. But it wasn't always like this.
Okay, a bit of context. The journalism in the 90s, especially in the middle of the 90s in Russia, were so free, so it was almost anarchy.
It was lots of media in Russia, independent media, fashion media, pro-government media. You didn't think about dangerous, because I didn't feel that it's dangerous. It was just interesting.
Unfortunately, when I grew up, the world of the media was changed completely.
In 1999, a new man emerged as leader of the Russian Federation, and things began to change.
President Putin had a really interesting and slightly mercurial rise to power. He studied law, then he joined Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the KGB, and spent about 15 years as a spy, including a 6-year stint in Dresden in what was then East Germany, before leaving as a lieutenant colonel and joining local politics, becoming a local politician in his native St. Petersburg. Initially, he was a foreign affairs advisor to the mayor. Wouldn't strike us as a particularly influential post, but he managed to climb the greasy pole, eventually moving to Moscow, getting close to then President Boris Yeltsin, and he was appointed one of the deputy prime ministers. And he was in that position when Yeltsin suddenly resigned and Putin was sort of elevated into power in 1999. And he's been in power one way or another ever since. At the time, Russia's constitution stipulated that a president could only serve 2 consecutive terms. And what's interesting is that when Putin was first elected, he won with 53% of the vote. And that may have been a lesson to him that perhaps his majority was slender. And what we've seen since then is him take increasingly draconian steps to tighten his grip on power.
Since the beginning, Vladimir Putin has been destroying the media landscape.
Time to time, step by step, we started to see that it became more dangerous.
Several channels were closed, or the editors-in-chief were changed into more loyal people, or some of his oligarchs could buy something. It's a tool as well. So it was really not the best time to be a journalist.
President Putin has used a 2-track approach to cement his grip on power. I mean, firstly, we can look at the way he deals with the opposition politicians, most notably Alexei Navalny, who has been tortured, poisoned, exiled, and now imprisoned on sort of largely trumped up charges, or at least charges that wouldn't hold water in the West, because his only crime really seems to be exposing Russian corruption, government corruption, and opposing the Putin regime. Simultaneously, the government has cracked down on media organizations, primarily organizations which have reported on the just very existence of an opposition in Russia. But social media, mainstream media, newspapers, websites, anything that reported the activities, for example, of Navalny and his supporters were deemed to have broken increasingly stringent media rules. So there are situations where Facebook, Twitter, social media sites were taken to court or sued or fined by the Russian government for broadcasting information about the opposition.
In the beginning, there were more economical tools. Maybe 2008, he changed his tools. And this is how we got Roskomnadzor. Basically, it's a censorship department. They watch, they block, they send different warnings, like you have to delete this article, you have to delete this interview, you need to do this, you need to do that. But it was not the end. It was only the beginning.
There seems to have been an increase in media repression, but it hasn't been totally linear. It accelerated towards 2009, 2010. A lot of this was linked to the Chechen conflict, where Russia was waging an incredibly bloody campaign against Chechen separatists. Journalists, particularly those who were opposed to the war or who were questioning Putin's strategy, fell foul of the Kremlin. What we've seen more recently is a fresh crackdown. In the immediate aftermath of Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, a whole raft of laws were passed that made it almost impossible, if not impossible, for free media to exist. So independent news outlets were shut down, websites were banned. The BBC can't broadcast, you can't access its site unless you're sort of using very clever mechanisms to dodge and sidestep internet censorship. And so Russians were largely forced to rely on state media. A lot of them already, this is an interesting thing about Russia, a lot of them already rely on national television, state television, for their diet of news. So in that sense, Moscow, the Kremlin, already has a huge amount of influence over most people. At least it speaks to a lot of people through these obedient, obsequious outlets which parrot the government line. But for those people who were independent-minded, for those people who did want an alternative voice, it's become much harder to get that news.
They create a mark of foreign agent for media and for physical person. This is an official list of the enemies. It's like the enemy of the government, the enemy of the authorities. They put different people and media into this list just to make them stop, just to make them sit quiet. So you need to put this disclaimer every single time when you reply on Twitter, on Facebook, when you post anything on Telegram channel or on YouTube channel. You always need to use this stupid disclaimer.
This news media is foreign agent, and this man, foreign agent, this status is uncomfortable. Uncomfortable because government have access for all my transaction and transaction media zone, and I need to publish all our expensive every day.
It's danger because they could be in prison, they could leave their money, their houses, and something like that.
The phrase foreign agent, the designation foreign agent, is a mechanism for the Kremlin to make life much more difficult for anyone who is not necessarily towing the Kremlin line. And it introduces a whole set of administrative hurdles which make it difficult, almost impossible to operate. And that has had this chilling effect. It's triggered this exodus, or it's encouraged this exodus of independent media.
It's not a part of his propaganda. This is part of dividing people. This is part of his inner politic. Propaganda is one thing, and all these foreign agents, it's more about dividing people. So he creates a civil conflict. Like, there are some bad Russians, they are the enemies, so you need to hate them.
For our group, is situation like Stalin's times, and many people have 10 years, 15 years prison, 20 years prison. But our group is small, and in Russia don't have mass repression. Many people don't understand this pressure for independent media, for activists. Regime of Putin is clever and don't started mass repression against society. Now repression is targeted, and foreign agency is target, and criminal cases is target, and repression against Navalny is personal target. It's not many people, and only few. Now, independent media can't work in Russia because we feel permanent danger.
The most sinister, the most terrifying part of this crackdown has actually been a campaign to kill journalists who report uncomfortable truths. Now, the estimates vary, but according to the International Federation of Journalists, some 300 journalists have been killed or died suspiciously in their jobs since 1993. So, you know, our colleagues in Russia who report the truth, it is no exaggeration to say they risk their lives and their liberty to do it.
I wake up at 6 every day and listen sound of elevator because police come in this time. You permanent waiting search for your room. Permanent. You feel permanent danger.
You don't feel safe nowhere. At your home, in your car, at your office. There is no place you can hide. My editor-in-chief, he was in this situation when somebody brought an axe to his front door and head of the pig. Russian journalism.
I have problem with police in Russia, and police searched room of my mother. Police suspected me about Moscow demonstration for support Navalny. Police arrested me while walking with my son 5 years. A court arrested me for 25 days. It's my favorite story about me, for retweet of joke.
If you are an activist, it's much more worse, because you can go to prison like this, just because you post on Facebook. Even if you use the word war, you can go to prison, and these people exist, they are already in prison.
Could you just introduce yourself, so give us your full name, how old you are, and what you do?
Like during interrogation. I'm Sergei Davidis, I'm 54. I'm from Moscow, but now live in Vilnius temporarily. I'm a head of Political Prisoners Support Memorial Program and co-chair of Human Rights Defense Center Memorial. Memorial is a huge network of human rights organizations in Russia. The first and main mission of Memorial was the restoration of historical memory, mainly memory about the victims of Stalin's repressions.
Memorial was the oldest human rights organization in Russia, until it was ordered to close by a Moscow court in December 2022. In that same year, the organization won the Nobel Peace Prize for its efforts to support Russian political prisoners.
When our organization was liquidated, we were charged with violations of foreign agents law and justification of extremism and terrorism for our support of political prisoners who were charged with extremism and terrorism. Since it is forbidden to speak the truth about the war, I, with my family and my colleagues also, had to leave the country. I left Russia in the beginning of last March, soon after the war began. And reasons were rather obvious. I am responsible for this project of political prisoners support, and in order to continue this activity, I should be free at least. I'm afraid my English would not be enough to express it completely. For sure, it's a kind of disgust, it's kind of horror, because on the one hand, it's something absolutely awful. War in Europe, in places which all of us know and visited. I have been to many cities and towns which are now destroyed. And when peaceful people are killed, we don't know what for. It's absolutely awful, terrible situation. But when we know that our country is doing that on behalf of us, at our expense, it's especially awful. Sometimes you just want to close your eyes and forget about it and imagine that you open your eyes and it's not true. Any war is awful, but war which our country wages is especially awful for us who feel responsibility for that. And war against those whom we consider even closer to us than some of our competitors makes this feeling even harder. We are against this war. We have never supported it. We support Ukraine, but anyway we are responsible for it. Not because we did something special to unleash this war, for sure not. But we allowed it to happen anyway. We, as a part of our country, were not effective enough to withstand the dictatorship that allowed it to happen. Usually the protests take place over there. Last time between 200 and 300 people gathered on this lawn.
What would happen if we did this in Russia?
It was impossible to put it. Each person which comes not with these photos but just with the word peace or no war on a sheet of paper, or even with 8 asterisks symbolizing no war in Russian, is arrested, taken to police office and often prosecuted. There is unfortunately no freedom of expression, no freedom of assembly now in Russia. The process of deterioration was lasting for many years, but after the war was unleashed, the last remaining freedoms were destroyed.
Memorial estimates conservatively that the number of political prisoners currently detained in Russia is at least 500.
For sure, the situation with political prisoners is getting worse. We should worry about it. Now they declared that it is a crime to have an opinion, to express an opinion different from the state about the war. For sure, it's much more dangerous and much more simple to become a political prisoner now.
People who were detained face the prospect of trumped-up charges, kangaroo courts, and even torture at the hands of the security services.
If we speak about political prisoners, it happens sometime, but usually in the very beginning of investigation, when people are arrested and are considered not to be officially arrested yet. There is no control in this situation, and they can be tortured, especially the FSB guys, Federal Security Bureau, are inclined to torture people. Probably they do it in many cases. If you speak about political prisoners, tortures are usually used to frighten them and to make them witness against themselves and their friends. They beat, they use plastic bags to suffocate. They especially often use electricity to throw the current through the body, and these tortures are described, especially often practiced by FSB.
This is the reality we live in. Unfortunately, people in prison, people are tortured, they detained for nothing.
The leader of opposition, Ilya Yashin, was sentenced to 8.5 years only for live stream about Bucha, and for few words about Bucha. 8.5 years of prison.
You can go to the single protest with empty paper, empty. You can be arrested.
Some opposition activists are given an ultimatum from the authorities: your beliefs or your freedom.
I had two security service agents waiting for me in my apartment building. At the gunpoint, they explained to me that I basically had 48 hours or I'll be in jail for a long time.
Natalia Arno is the founder and president of the Free Russia Foundation, a pro-democracy organization now operating in exile. Hers is not a political position it's easy to hold in Russia.
I was working for an American democracy promotion organization. I was traveling all across Russia in all 11 time zones from Kaliningrad to Kamchatka, and we had a lot of events, trainings, conferences, discussions, and of course in all our events we were discussing how to make Russia better, how to not to have a dictatorship but instead to have a democracy. And this of course was something that Putin's regime didn't like. I had surveillance like constantly 24/7. I knew that all my emails are being read, all my phone conversations are being recorded. I had always had my tail chasing me anywhere in any Russian region or in Moscow where I lived. I would go to a grocery store, I would meet those people there, or to my gym, or anywhere. They were around all the time, or even saying, today we know what colors your underwear because like they have bugs even in my bathroom. So I was used to such intimidation and again, so I wasn't surprised when I saw these guys in my apartment building. There were years and years and years of surveillance before that. I wasn't worried about my personal safety, but I have a son and they knew everything about my son. They would be saying, you should start working for us or your son will be in danger. We know what time he returned from seeing his friends yesterday. He came home like at 11-12 p.m. and it's very dangerous. It was a lot of threats around surrounding my son. As soon as I became country director in 2008, since that time and until I had to flee in 2012, there was more and more, increasingly more surveillance and intimidation and threats. But then finally it was a clear choice. Like this is the time when you have to decide either you are with us or you go to jail or you just 48 hours and flee. I was threatened and I was given a clear choice. Either to be in jail for 20 years for state treason because I was working for an American democracy promotion organization, or I had 48 hours to pack and leave. So I chose freedom. I chose not to be in jail but to do something meaningful, and I'm glad that like 10 years later I'm still in this fight.
Just months after this interview was filmed, Natalia alleges she was targeted again.
I was for a closed event in Prague, and after that event I came back to my hotel room and the door to my room was ajar, and so the first thing I did, I started to check for bugs, for listening recording devices in the room. I checked my suitcase, my clothes, the room, didn't find anything, but immediately I noticed a very strong and strange perfume or some smell in the room. Very unpleasant, too sweet, and I went to bed at 5 a.m. I woke up from a very sharp pain, and it was a very strong toothache, like very strong dental pain.
The pain was bad enough to cut short her trip. She booked the next available flight to Washington, D.C.
If I had any slightest suspicion that I might have been poisoned, I wouldn't dare to have a transatlantic flight because, again, too dangerous for so many hours without medical attention. During my flights, it was a nightmare. It seemed like my organs were failing, like one by one. I felt huge numbness, especially my right hand, but also like both hands, legs, and what worried me mostly was along the spine.
After landing in the USA, the pain got worse, and Natalia was admitted to emergency care.
I asked the doctors since I was in pain, I asked them still not to give me any painkillers or not to start any treatment, because I wanted to have as clean tests as possible.
She was experiencing symptoms consistent with poisoning. 3 months later, a neurologist corroborated her suspicions.
She confirmed that it's exposure to nerve toxins and couldn't be caused by natural reasons. We thought that if we are in the EU, in the NATO countries, in the US, Canada and so on, that we are safer. But unfortunately, the Kremlin has very long tentacles in the West. We have always known that this Kremlin's regime is criminal, murderous, brutal, brazen, vindictive. We have always known that transnational repression is quite an important tool for them, and poisonings is quite a favorite method. But we as a community, we should understand that it's some kind of a weird badge of honor for us, because if the Kremlin is irritated by our actions, it means that we are very impactful, very effective, that we are doing a lot of things to stop the war, to try to change public opinion inside Russia, to do a lot of things that we are doing to change Russia for the better. We are the worst enemies for the Kremlin regime.
Those who stay and continue to speak out against Putin face enormous consequences. It's a sacrifice not many are willing to make.
My name is Evgenia Karamurza. I'm advocacy coordinator at the Free Russia Foundation and a wife of a political prisoner, Vladimir Karamurza. In 2015 and 2017, he survived 2 assassination attempts by a team of FSB operatives in the service of the Russian state. He was poisoned twice by an unknown substance. Both times it happened in Moscow. He developed very weird symptoms suddenly and ended up in a coma with a multiple organ failure. Both times he was given a 5% chance of survival. He spent months relearning how to walk, how to carry out the simplest tasks, like, pouring tea from a teapot. He could not lift a teapot. And then he went back to his work. Many years ago, it became clear to us that it would not be safe for the kids to be in Russia, that they could always be used by the regime to put pressure on Vladimir. And in order for him to continue his work as he saw fit, in order for him to be able to take those risks, I know that it was important for him to know that his family was safe. So we've been living outside of Russia for many years now.
In April 2023, Vladimir Karamurza was sentenced to 25 years in prison after being found guilty of treason and spreading false information about the Russian armed forces. Charges he denies. It's the longest sentence yet to be received by a member of the opposition.
He was allowed to call me after his sentence. His initial sentence, 15-day sentence, was pronounced. So he called me to let me know that he was okay. That's what he said. Please don't worry. Everything will be fine, he said. Well, I've heard that before. I miss having him home. I miss having breakfast with my husband. I miss having walks together. Everything about family is not as it should be nowadays. Since last February, over 20,000 people have been detained, arbitrarily detained all across the country for speaking out against the war. And they do this even though the regime is throwing atrocious measures of repression against them. The regime is using punitive psychiatry, torture, extreme violence, including sexual violence against those protesters. And yet people continue going out and protesting. For years, he's been fighting on behalf of political prisoners, trying to make sure that their voices were heard, fighting for their lives, fighting for their freedom. And now that he's joined the list of political prisoners in Russia, I'm very grateful to see that there are many people fighting for him now. So next time I'll see him, I don't know, I'll tell him that I'm very proud of him. Because I am. I'll tell him that he's my hero.
In a small studio space in central Vilnius, Tatiana and Mediazona reporter Maxim Latavrin are hosting a live stream on YouTube. The video streaming site is one of the few ways that opposition journalists are able to reach people inside Russia. For now, the site remains unblocked.
Our main audience is people who are in Russia right now. We need to talk truth to them, and we need to educate them, and we need to help them, make decisions. From the beginning of the war, our website was banned, and now people in Russia couldn't read our articles without VPN. We have mirrors of our website, and these mirrors blocked every day. And every day we open new mirrors and we create new links and share these links with our readers.
We have many viewers every month, and today Chief of Wagner Evgeny Prigozhin said about stop mobilization of prisoners from Russian prison after 2 days after our article about this. Yeah, I think we have influenced not only Russian auditory and for many people in power too.
For Sergei, Tatiana and the other journalists and activists, exile is a means to an end, a way to keep the fight against Putin alive and expose the uncomfortable truths about the war that the Kremlin is desperate to keep hidden from the Russian people. Like the true toll the war is taking on its armed forces.
This is our main project since the beginning of the war. We are counting deaths of Russian soldiers. This is not a really death toll because we believe that death toll is much higher, but this is the lowest number we can actually prove. We are gathering our data from the public available sources like social media, most of it is family members.
Since this was filmed in mid-February, Russian casualties have skyrocketed. Mediazona now estimates more than 60,000 soldiers have died in the war.
Yeah, this is a post in a local fans of Toyota club in Chita, it's Zabaikalsky Krai. During the special military operation, our friend Zabolotsky Nikolai has died.
Putin is dangerous. We want loss of Putin. If this loss was loss of Russia, okay.
Sergei Berestynyov died 12th of November in Lugansk Oblast. It doesn't say anything about how he died or where he was serving.
I think he is a war criminal who destroyed so many lives, who sold this country to his friends.
Is cruel, is feel himself great man.
He is a dictator. He is not too talented man. He is not a bright personality. He is not too clever. He is rather cunning. And he has an ability to convince people. But I do not think that it is important now. No masks can cover his face and his nature now. For sure, he still deceives sufficient part of Russian population, but it's not their free choice. They have to accept him because they have no alternative.
Many Russians don't support Putin because in Russia no have election. Many people keep silence and fear repression and fear prison. Silence is not support.
During the military operation in Ukraine, my brother Andrei Ryovin has died. And the funeral will happen tomorrow at 5th December in that address, and here is a photo of the man.
I am so furious that this bunch of thieves and murderers is trying to destroy my family for years, is trying to carry out a genocide of the Ukrainian people, is persecuting and torturing people in Russia. That makes me so furious. Impunity leads to more aggression. This is what Vladimir Putin has shown time and time again over the years. He invaded Georgia, he led a war in Chechnya, he annexed Crimea, he violently squashed peaceful protests in Russia, he bombed Syria. None of that received a strong enough response from the West. And internal repression inevitably leads to external aggression. They go together like two sides of the same coin. For as long as this regime is in power, war will continue. It will not stop. It will go on and go on and go on. And if Vladimir Putin is allowed a way out, if Ukraine is somehow forced, coerced, whatever, to give up part of its territory to a dictator to appease him, it will mean that Vladimir Putin will represent this as a victory. He will regroup and attack again. It might not be Ukraine next time, it might be Moldova or one of the Baltic states. It will go on.
The post saying, everything be alright, it's a station. That was last words which Sergei Goryev tell to his relatives before his death.
Putin has nothing to lose. He wants to keep his power, his authority. I think he personally is able to do anything. After he decided to release this full-scale war against Ukraine, he can do everything.
This is a report from a funeral. It says 2 volunteers died in the special military operation. The first one, 34 years old. He has left a widow and a 15-year-old daughter. Another volunteer, 50 years old. Yeah, he was kind of old. He was something like 50 years old. And he died at December 2022 in Lugansk Oblast.
I think Russia never returns to the 23rd of February. It's impossible. We have already lost our Russia. End of story. I don't know what we would have after the war ends. And nobody knows, because nobody knows how this war ends. Back to normal? Never. There is no way back.
I remember a man, he was 40 years old or something like that. He was very adult, and he decided to become a volunteer in this war. He died after a week, and the post says that he had something like 2 or 3 daughters, and he left them alone. I just can't understand why he did it. He just decided to go on the war and give his life for nothing.
The only way for Russia to live at peace with itself and its neighbors is for it to become a democracy. And in order for democracy to be built in Russia, we need people who will be willing to undertake the task of rebuilding everything from scratch, rebuilding a country from ruins and making sure that it doesn't slip toward yet another autocratic or totalitarian regime. And these people are now sitting in jails or are in exile. And they need to survive in order to be there to rebuild the country after the regime collapses.
Don't think that you are alone. You are not alone. There are many people who support you and who think the same way you think. So don't give up, be strong, and don't let him make you believe that you are alone, because you are not.
We do what we should do. I believe that our activity is demanded. People need our support. and the world need information we collect. And I hope that Ukraine will win somehow and Putin will lose. Hope is very important in this situation.
Ukraine's victory is a key thing in all this. Only the victory on Ukrainian terms, when again all the territories are returned to Ukraine, complete defeat of Putin's regime. And then it can lead to regime change in Russia, to democracy in Russia, which then will become stable for the region and for the entire world.
I don't want to cancel my country, and I don't want to pretend that it is not my country. It is mine. It's not his. How it ends, I don't know, but I will do my best to go back.
This regime is monstrous because the only thing it knows how to do is to kill and to steal. And I will do everything I can to make sure that it collapses, so that my kid's father can return home to us, and so that Ukraine can find peace and rebuild.
The people who the regime designated as foreign agents, they are those who care about Russia, who wants Russia to be better, to be normal, to be like a normal democracy. Everybody I'm working with, all partners, all colleagues, they're either belonging to the undesirable organization or foreign agents or just very close to being on this list.
We have this joke among ourselves, and if someone hasn't yet been determined as a foreign agent or an undesirable organization, we look at the person, with a bit of suspicion, like, what's wrong with you? Putin believes that there is no Russia without him. And so anyone, of course, who opposes him is a traitor, because he undermines his power and he threatens his rule. So, of course, it is a badge of honor to be considered a foreign agent or an undesirable organization, because it means that this person or this organization is actually basically fighting the evil and threatening Putin's rule. There is nothing more rewarding than to feel that you are seen as a traitor by the regime, I would say.